Minister LeBlanc, welcome to Mexico.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And you're not coming here alone. You're coming with a big mission of companies who are interested in investing in Mexico. Tell us more about that.
So, Gabriela, it's the biggest bilateral trade mission that Canada's organized in decades, probably ever. We're here with probably close to 400 people, representing about 230 businesses, big and small, and business associations, business organizations that are really interested in seeing how we can expand our two-way trade with Mexico, a trade mission with Canadian businesses. And I was told this afternoon, more than 2,000 business-to-business meetings have been set up.
You can say in a way that President Trump, or the pressure from the Trump administration, has, in a way, put pressure into Mexico and Canada to look for this type of opportunities. Wouldn't you say that?
I wouldn't pretend to speak for the government of Mexico, but for the government of Canada, that's absolutely true. And Mexico, for us, is a very reliable partner. There are deep people-to-people cultural ties. Business leaders in Canada that talk to me about their relationships with Mexican companies. It's very positive. But there's an opportunity for us in the face of some of the headwind created by the tariffs. And I've talked to Secretary Ebrard many times about the challenges that they have in Mexico and the challenges we have in Canada.
What are those challenges that concern Canadian companies to do businesses here in Mexico?
The challenge is so much of, for example, integrated supply chains was seen as sort of through the United States. So much of the trade with Mexico was not visible or wasn't as well known as it should be because there was an American partner that was part of these integrated supply chains. So the challenge was my word, it may not be the best word, the opportunity that Canadian businesses see is to come and have direct relationships with Mexican companies, with Mexican supply chain organizations that doesn't filter through any other country.
And going back to trade, there's a countdown, 136 days for the formal joint review of the USMCA.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I learned something now.
136 and counting. But the question here is, Canada's ready, correct?
Yes.
So that's a formal review.
Absolutely. So we, like Mexico, like the United States, have done consultations with Canadian businesses last fall. We had meetings with the 13 premiers, so they would be like state governors, subnational governments in Canada. We're ready to sit down, and we hope that we can move quickly.
President Trump has said a lot of things about the USMCA, maybe that Canada needs it more than the USA. So my question for you is Canada ready for probably a review that does not mean an extension for another 16 years, but rather an annual review if the three parties do not agree on it?
We hope that's not the case for the reasons you said, that it has been a success for the three countries. If you look at the prosperity it's brought, the security, economic security it's brought, it has been a successful trade agreement for Mexico, Canada, and the United States. We think in the end, the United States government will conclude that it's in their economic interest to have a stable free trade arrangement with Canada and Mexico. And we'll do the work that's necessary to make that case to the United States. If they decide to go, as you noted, in a year-by-year review, sure, we'll deal with that then. But that uncertainty is exactly what businesses and investors don't want. If you're looking at making a long-term investment, having a sort of annual review or having all kinds of sectoral tariffs, the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum and automobiles. This makes it very hard for businesses, including in the United States, but they can speak for themselves and it's their government.
My question also, I wonder what your reaction was when you saw in Washington the vote when 6 Republican congressmen joined the Democrats to vote and rebuke President Trump's tariffs. He could still veto it, but still, what do you make of it?
Again, Canadian politicians shouldn't comment on domestic politics in the United States. The Congress or the Senate will vote the way they want to do. The president will veto or not what he wants to veto. But what that tells us is many of the border states and many states that have significant business relationships with Canada, we're the best customer for 17 American states. And if you think of industries like the automobile sector, Canadian aluminum is pretty important to U.S. automakers, just as one example. And they're now facing a very significant tariff on importing that aluminum, and there's no easy substitute. But that example repeats itself all across the economy in the three countries.
The RED agreement means where does China stand in the context of in this review of the USMCA? Because President Trump and other politicians have said that Canada shouldn't have done a partnership, which is a limited partnership with China to begin with. But at the same time, they're worried that Canada and Mexico become the entryway to their market. What have you told the U.S. Trade Representative and even Secretary Ebrard about China?
So we have said, and it's a very good question, because you're right, it comes up a lot with business leaders and with political leaders in Mexico and the United States in our conversations. We have said that we're absolutely prepared to work with Mexico and the United States on the issues of transshipment and some companies trying to get around, if it's Chinese non-market economies, the most obviously significant one would be China, trying to use different entry points into North America that don't comply with the rules. We're happy to work with the United States and Mexico on that. I talked to Ambassador Greer about the arrangement that Mr. Carney came to in China a few weeks ago. It was basically in order to protect Canadian canola farmers and seafood producers, lobster and crab. I represent a district on the east coast of Canada. The lobster and crab fishery, very important. The Chinese had put tariffs that almost made it impossible to sell into a $7 billion market. What we did is allow, as in 2023-24, a very limited number of Chinese electric vehicles, less than 3% of the new sales, a new vehicle market in Canada, into Canada. It's an arrangement similar to what the United States did with respect to soy farmers. So every country makes arrangements, sector specific, as you said, time limited, or it's not. The confusion may have been in the United States. Some commentators said that Canada was entering a free trade agreement with China, which is not the case at all.
Lastly, Minister LeBlanc, the Gordie Howe Bridge, you smile.
I did. I was Minister of Infrastructure in Canada.
Could it become leverage in broader trade negotiations? I
hope not. Again, there's some confusion. That is a very, very critical trade corridor between Canada and the United States.
How critical?
20%, I think, of the north of the Canada-U.S. trade crosses that particular bridge. It's hundreds of millions of dollars a month that goes across the St. Clair River between Windsor and Detroit. And it's essential for the trade in both countries. So I think it would have been, it's a national security concern for us to have only one point of crossing.
Minister LeBlanc, you're in Mexico at a time where there's been a tragedy in for a Canadian mining company. 10 workers disappeared. The bodies of 5 of them have been retrieved. The Canadian embassy in Mexico put out a statement saying that they were grieving with the families. The question here is, can you summarize what the Canadian government knows about this case from what the Mexican government has told you?
So I agree with Ambassador McKay and others. It's a tragedy when people working for a Canadian company or anybody in Mexico is subject to that kind of violence or that kind of criminal activity. So we think of those 10 people and their families who were working for a Canadian company. I know from the Canadian police authorities that they have a very open and a very frequent exchange of information with their Mexican counterparts. I want to be a bit careful because It's an ongoing police investigation. We saw President Sheinbaum's comments this week. Obviously, the Canadian police and the company will do whatever they need to do to work with the Mexican authorities and to determine exactly what happened and ensure that that kind of risk doesn't present itself again.
Because the mining sector is a pillar, even within the USMCA in the future. So will your government raise concerns about, for example, cartel influence in mining operations with the Mexican government?
We always talk to our Mexican counterparts about security issues because it's in Canada's interest to have a partnership with Mexico at the level of national police authorities around these criminal activities. So we have a lot of confidence in President Sheinbaum's government, in the work that her police are doing. If you look at the recent case of the Canadian who was arrested and is in the United States now, Ryan Wedding, around drug trafficking. So I think this tragedy makes us think of what more can we do to ensure the security of people working for Canadian companies, for Canadian businesses that want to do business with Mexican counterparts. But we're very confident that the Mexican authorities, the President Sheinbaum's government, are taking all of the necessary steps in these security contexts.
Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you for having me on the program.